Hello everyone, it's Sandra and Flora for another video about horse jumping. In this video I finally want to show you some ridden exercises that I've been doing with Flora and my other cobs to learn to tackle poles confidently and to build on our trust in each other.
Very sleepy.
She's actually very sleepy.
Very sleepy.
Been working very hard, Flora has. Of course, training a horse whilst riding is very different from training a horse from the ground. When riding, I have more ways of influencing the horse positively, but I also can get so much more in the way of the horse with my legs, hands, and how I balance my weight in the saddle. One important thing I learned along the way is that it is far easier for me to maintain a good riding position when doing jumping training if I have my stirrups short, far shorter probably than you would think. Your knee should be bent and you should easily be able to stand up in your stirrups and hover over the saddle with your heels down. This way you're able to manage your position over poles and jumps in a way that interferes far less with the horse than if the stirrup was left as long as you might have it for flat work. Plus, with shorter stirrups, your leg is less likely to slip back behind the saddle when you jump. Also easier to stay on the horse on landing and not do a beautiful but accidental over the horse's head dismount. I mentioned in my last video how I spotted a few bad habits in my riding style that I think made it so much harder for Flora to do her job. One bad habit was to tense up around my shoulders. This made it very hard for me to be soft and flexible in my hands and give Flora the space to stretch out over the jump. Another thing I tended to do was to lift my hands up just before the jump. My hands should stay where they always are, just above the horse's withers. And if the horse needs the space, they should gently and softly move with the horse stretching forward. Easier said than done. When riding Flora, I carry a riding whip with me as an extra aid to gently touch her on her shoulder or behind my leg. She seems to need this extra tickly encouragement sometimes when she gets a bit too laid back about my leg and voice commands. The first exercise I want to show you today is very straightforward. Remember those ground poles from my last video? They are laid out at a distance of 2 steps again. I work my horse over them in a walk and try to build up a nice busy rhythm where the horse lifts her legs properly and keeps her neck and back engaged without leaning onto the reins. I do this in both directions. The same in trot. It is important to either do the rising trot or go into a position where you stand up in the stirrups and hover over the saddle with your upper body slightly bent forwards, but not crouching. Keep your back straight, your shoulders back and your head up. Again, I practice this going in both directions over the poles, and I use the way around the arena to keep the trot steady and in good rhythm with the horse going forward enthusiastically. When you and your horse are happy with walk and trot over the poles, start with a nice steady canter around the arena. Not going over the poles initially, just work on getting the canter really well balanced, forward going and with you in a balanced position with heels down and upper body slightly forward so that you're almost hovering above the saddle with your backside. Then approach the poles at canter. Most likely your horse will knock a pole or two. That's okay. This is what this exercise is all about, to give your horse a chance to work out the correct spacing between poles with you on board. Just keep going. Don't push the horse too hard or hold him back in anticipation. The trick here is to work on your balanced seat, keep the horse moving rhythmically and let him do the rest. After all, he can do this without you on board already, so just leave him in charge of his legs as much as possible as he is used to. You can see here that Flora is trying different approaches to spacing out her legs over the poles correctly without stumbling over them. That's exactly what you want to encourage in your horse, to solve the problem by taking different action herself. And for you to trust that she can learn this if you give her the time and opportunity. Here are some clips from about a month later, with training sessions maybe twice a week. You can clearly see how Flora now moves so much more steadily and confidently over the poles. Now comes the fun part. When your horse is happy tackling these ground poles, try to prop them up just off the ground. I use tires and pieces of wood just to raise them a hand's width or two off the ground, to turn them into what people sometimes call bouncing poles. Because that's exactly what you do with your horse. You bounce over them. The sensation is not too different from sitting on a rocking horse, and it is fun. Your horse should have learned by now to navigate the space between the poles more or less correctly, and by raising the poles a bit, you ask the horse to put a bit more of a bounce into each of her canter strides. This will help your horse to learn to shift their weight even more off their front legs and onto their back. That's what they need for getting over bigger jumps with you, and this is a great exercise to help them with this. Your seat should be even more forward, anticipating the bounce of the horse's movement, standing in the stirrups with your backside above the saddle to give room for the horse's back movement. And your shoulders and hands should be loose and soft to move with the horse's neck and shoulder movement over the poles. Of course, there will be the occasional knock, but that's okay. It's all a learning curve. It's just a bit of extra exercise on my behalf, as I usually work without helper who could pick up poles for me. And that's also how I ended up not having my head in these shots. Sorry about that. Where's that extra camera person when we need them? An extra exercise you might choose to add before riding over the bouncing poles is to lunge your horse over them. Winnie, Flora's mum, is a bit less confident and fit, so I lunge her first before riding to give her some more time to work things out herself. She is not hindered by my weight or leg and rein aids, but the downside is that it is harder on the lunge to keep the horse at a steady rhythm and moving in a straight line over the poles. The last exercise for today, after ridden ground poles and bouncing poles, are the ridden trotting poles. Again, space the poles out as you did in my last video, about 1 meter apart. This exercise can be ridden in walk and trot, but doesn't work well in canter because of the tight spacing of the poles. Start off in walk if this is your first exercise of the day, and when your horse and you are a bit more warmed up, speed up to trot. Ride over the poles on either hand. Keep the trot nice and busy, keeping your seat light, well balanced and flexible to accommodate the horse's steps, and enjoy. I hope you found this video interesting, even if you're not a horsey sort of person yet. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next and final part of this series. Bye for now.